Welcome to the meeting of the 27th, number 27, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. The committee is meeting today from 3:32 to 5:32. We will hear from Shared Services Canada as part of the committee study on procurement practices within Shared Services Canada, and then discuss committee business. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants at this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules as follows. Interpretation of this video conference will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. To raise a point of order during the meeting, committee members should ensure their microphone is unmuted and say point of order to get the chairman's attention. The clerk and the analysts are participating in the meeting virtually today. If you need to speak with them during the meeting, please email them through the committee email address. The clerk can also be reached by his mobile phone. For those people who are participating in the committee room, please note that masks are required unless seated and when physically distancing is not possible. I will now invite the witnesses to make their opening statements. Mr. Glover.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee for your invitation to discuss the Gartner report you received. I'm pleased to be here today to address any questions the committee may have with respect to the report.
That I have the utmost respect for this committee and its important function in our democracy. I greatly support the work of the committee, and I am committing to helping its members better understand how Shared Services Canada is working to modernize our networks in order to better serve Canadians. I am here today to provide you with as much information as possible to aid you in this work. It is also why, when responding to the committee's request, I included additional information that was not originally requested, but which I hope will be helpful to the committee and answers questions which members have previously posed to me and members of my organization. I am, however, bound as the president of Shared Services Canada to steward our information in a manner that respects different priorities, including our democratic processes, the integrity of proprietary information, and national security. That said, know that I am fully committed to assisting the committee with your endeavor to understand the network space. As president of Shared Services, I support the Minister of Digital Government in providing federal public servants with the tools and the IT infrastructure they need to deliver programs and services Canadians expect in a digital era, services that are delivered on secure and reliable networks. When it was created, Shared Services Canada inherited many different independent and unstandardized departmental networks. I would encourage members to review the Network Modernization Way Forward document, in particular pages 11 through 15, for details of what we inherited and what has changed over time. Our work is ongoing as we continue to take an enterprise approach to modernization. This means we will continue to consolidate, to standardize, modernize our networks right across government. It is essential that the Canadian government keep pace. As the pandemic has shown, it is even more critical in a crisis. Over the past year, we were able to respond quickly when urgent changes were needed and adoption to solutions were required at unprecedented speed. We were able to increase our network capacity, provide widespread secure remote access, and roll out collaboration tools that allow public servants to work securely as well as work remotely. However, the complexity and the pace of change in the digital environment that we need to be prepared for significant and ongoing upgrades as technical innovations, such as software-defined infrastructure, where critical IT infrastructure and functions like data centers are fully automated and programmable. We also need to ensure that we have the IT infrastructure that can take advantage of emerging technology, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, 5G capacity, and potential innovations that might transform federal service delivery, such as multi-user supercomputers and, in time, quantum computing. As we go forward, we are engaging with industry in advance of setting up long-term contracting vehicles to deliver a common set of services to all government departments and partners. rather than the customized services that exist today. To that end, SSC is developing a modern enterprise network and security strategy to increase network, cloud, and mobile access and ensure agile service delivery to all our partners. The new model aligns with government priorities to allow us to work smarter and more efficiently, as well as more reliably. In developing the strategy, we must consult with third parties to ensure our approach is responsive, reflective of industry trends, and has sound governance. In this context, SSC proactively engaged Gartner, an industry-leading research firm. We asked Gartner to review our network and security documentation and give us advice on developing an approach for decision-making for future network equipment sourcing, and to look at specific case studies within SSC to provide insight and advice into decisions that we have made on sourcing of equipment. Gartner made a number of recommendations, which have been shared with you, to ensure that our documentation follows industry standard practices, to help us standardize how we source our equipment through open and competitive procurements, and to provide us with review mechanisms for when we need to deviate from this approach. These recommendations have provided Shared Services Canada with approaches to help balance business, technical, security, and procurement risks, and to create a network strategy that fosters accountability and transparency. We subsequently updated our strategy paper and posted it on canada.ca. The network modernization way forward solicits feedback from industry partners and tries to attempt to document our future state. This strategy will, of course, evolve as SSC continues to work with industry as part of its collaborative procurement process, and to keep pace with the changes in technology and advancements in innovation. To do our work, we need positive functional vendor relationships. I take disclosure seriously. I take disclosure of information that would affect this relationship extremely seriously. I am mindful of the powers of the House of Commons for the production of documents and the role of members in holding the government to account. Part of my job as a senior public servant is to reconcile the exercise of these privileges with others, including national security, cabinet confidence, and the confidentiality of business information. In the report that I provided, I itemized each and every redaction and included the reasons which were made to protect the information deemed confidential, in keeping with the practices of public disclosures of such information. Making this information public would not only be making public Gartner's intellectual property and commercially sensitive information, but it could also be detrimental to the vendors included in this research. We looked at the report and only took out parts that would be a security risk or jeopardize industry relationships and partners. We take very seriously, Mr. Chair, the need for transparency, along with the need to protect proprietary information of the companies that have entrusted us with it. Thank you very much. We would be happy to take your questions. Merci. Nous sommes prêts pour répondre.
Thank you. We're ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Glover, and appreciate your presentation. We will now start with the first round of questioning, and we'll start with Ms. Harder for 6 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. And of course, welcome, Mr. Glover, and thank you for your opening remarks. I'll just start off with, I guess, a very simple question, and that is, who instructed the redactions from the Gartner report? I mean, when the committee requested it on the 22nd of March, 2021, the motion requested that the Gartner report be submitted to us in an unredacted form. Who asked for those redactions to be made?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the members' questions. The short answer is I did. As President of Shared Services, as I outlined in my opening remarks, I have an obligation to protect national security and confidential business information. I also sought legal counsel and was advised that my actions are consistent with those responsibilities.
So there are several redactions surrounding the SCC's procurement process and the impacts that could occur if a competitive request for proposal was held rather than an original equipment manufacturer, so OEM specific procurement from the NSCC. That's on several pages within this report. Can you explain why those redactions would be made in those areas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the members' questions. As per my letter, each of the redactions is indicated with a listing. So it would either have been for confidential business information reasons, where the companies were not comfortable with the disclosure of that
So
information.
in this case,
could-
on page 78, for example, it's actually because you list the reason that it's cabinet confidence. But what I'm interested in then is, to do the Gartner report, they had access to all of the information. So why were they given access to something that is under cabinet confidence?
So the majority of the redactions, excuse me, Mr. Chair, the majority of the redactions are related to confidential business information.
So sorry,
That is
no, just
Gartner's- yeah, I
I'll
understand
clarify because I don't know if you understood. So page 78, it says that it's cabinet confidence. Cabinet confidence is listed as the reason. So why was cabinet confidential information shared with Gartner?
Mr. Chair, if I can have a moment to look at the page in question.
I don't actually think you even need to look at the page. The question is quite simple. Why would information that is cabinet confidence information be shared with Gartner?
I'm trying, Mr. Chair, I'm trying to look at the very specifics to make sure that I provide the member with a full answer. I would be happy to follow up.
If it's truly, no, it's okay. We can answer this today, I think, through you, Chair. If it's truly confidential, if it's truly held under cabinet confidence, then it should not have been shared with Gartner. So why was it shared with Gartner, but the members of parliament within this committee cannot see it?
So, Mr. Chair, I've had a chance to look at the page in reference from the members' questions. Gartner was not able to see any specific cabinet confidences. It speaks to cabinet meetings, their potential existence, which is a confidentiality issue and is not to be disclosed. So Gartner was not disclosed any cabinet confidential information.
Okay. So if they weren't disclosed any cabinet confidence information, then why is that section redacted? Because you're saying on one hand that it is cabinet confidential, and then on another hand, you're saying that's not the case. So, Mr. Glover, through the chair, which is it?
So again, Mr. Chair, in response to the member's question, Gartner was not disclosed any cabinet confidences. They speak
then
to cabinet.
Through you, Mr. Chair, why is the information redacted? And why has Mr. Glover given the excuse that it is held under cabinet confidence in order to do the blacking out?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm attempting to answer the member's question.
No, you're attempting to skirt the member's question. Through you, Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I know for the sake of those that are listening, for those of us that are part of this debate and want to hear an answer to this particular question, and for the benefit of the translators as well, too, I simply ask that we allow the witness to respond to the question and provide a fulsome answer.
Mr. Kazmierczuk, I think that Mr. Glover is able to answer the question, and I think I would ask that everyone be respectful of everyone's time and try to recognize that the time commitment is very short in asking those questions, and be respectful of that. I will indicate that I have stopped the clock for you, Ms. Harder, and so I will restart it again. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, when I look at this is Gartner's report, and they wrote something in that report that is considered cabinet confidence. Why were they able to write something that is considered cabinet confidence? Why do they have information that the MPs at this committee cannot have access to?
Mr. Chair, happy to attempt again to respond to the member's question. Gartner did not. The redaction was made under an interpretation that I have, where they speak to processes about future meetings, and any references to future meetings that the government may have could be considered a cabinet confidence. They did not have access to it.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
They
why did they have access to that
hypothesized.
information if it is cabinet confidence? And if it's not truly cabinet confidence, then why can that page not be made known to this committee?
As I was attempting to finish, Mr. Chair, it speaks to when meetings may occur, and that, as I understand it and have been advised, is a cabinet confidence. They did not have access to it for me to suggest when cabinet may or may not consider something on a hypothesis is not appropriate to be disclosed. I can
So, Mr.
happily
Chair,
check
I'm
with
sorry.
council
So
again.
is what the member is sorry, the individual who's speaking is Mr. Glover trying to say that Gartner just supposed that these future meetings might happen, that this information wasn't actually supplied to Gartner?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. It is common knowledge when we are doing procurements that sometimes Treasury Board approval is sought, and that is done through Treasury Board meetings. If and when Treasury Board is required to do that, is not something that would be disclosed publicly.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. Thank you, Ms. Harder. We'll now go to Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. And Mr. Glover, I do want to say thank you. I know I see Mr. Davies, who's amongst us today, and I certainly have been hearing a good report from the vendor community that they are having with Mr. Davies. So you certainly did a good hire there, from what I hear in the community. But I'm also not directly involved. But I just want to say that to you through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Glover, I'm not going to question as to the reasons why you've redacted. I think you provided some good analysis, and I think it's incumbent among us parliamentarians. If I compare it to defense procurement, if we would ask all of the requirements that were included in a certain procurement, which for obvious reasons there are national security, those requirements would not be provided to this committee, even though we asked for it. So I understand why you have made those redactions, and I will accept them. Mr. Glover, I want to get back to the issue at hand, and I know you and I have had a discussion. I think it was back in November, just before the holidays, with regards to having. I'm going to quote another Gartner report, but the whole issue of having two OEMs within the network, whether it was through the WAN or the land or data centers, and the importance of that. And I think at that time you had recognized that SSC did have some work to do in order to not rely so much on one particular vendor and provide that two OEM environment within those network blocks. And I know that SSC is now engaging the vendor community, and part of the what I'm hearing right now is that SSC has done that before. They've done that in 2014 through another procurement engagement. So how, as president of Shared Services Canada, how will you demonstrate to the vendor community that there are this time around you're serious, you want to change that one OEM environment into a two OEM environment? How will you demonstrate to the vendor community that those short-term goals?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. The short answer is transparency and documentation. If you refer to some of the attachments that I included in response to the committee's request, we intend to be very transparent with you, with the vendor community, and with all Canadians about what we inherited, where we are at today, and where we want to moving forward. We will also work with industry so that they understand what our objectives are and why, so that they can think about the technologies that they are developing, and we can integrate them into our forward procurements. We are also moving to open source. We'll make it easier for us to allow more vendors into that ecosystem. But that, frankly, is not always a guarantee that different vendors will win. We've done 2 open generic procurements, and one happened to have been won by Cisco, a company that is subject of a lot of attention here. Another one won by Juniper. So we will be open, we will be transparent, we will consult with industry on what we need and why. We will invite them to help us refine our technology requirements to take advantage of state-of-the-art technologies moving forward. And we will be moving to more open source, software-defined, zero trust types of networks that Gartner speaks to. So every one of our actions will be fully transparent. The final thing that I would say, in line with the recommendations from Gartner, is oftentimes we get requirements from departments that say we have to go sole source, has to be plug and play. They can't accept anything else. The risk is too high. And we've implemented a review committee that looks at each and every one of those and challenges those requirements to make sure that they are what is claimed. And if it has to be specific because it's plug and play, the risk is too high or timing, we will accept that and we'll be transparent about it. But when it's not, we have a better process now to push back rather than simply accept because they say it must be sole source. We now challenge each and every one of those.
Thank you. And I know it continues to be of great concern, and I guess they're looking towards your leadership in making sure that this happens. And in the past, other stories that I was hearing was the fact that yes, we're making all these plans. We want to implement open source procurement or generic procurement, and because we spent the whole time planning and not meeting our deadlines, then it sort of became an emergency, and then we had to sole source. So how are you going to combat that within SSC and your client departments to ensure that that doesn't happen and companies get to have a fair say and a fair chance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I don't mean to be repetitive, but it goes back to the way forward document. Working with industry to lay out multi-year plans. If you look at some of the documents we've tabled with you, they have short, medium, and long term about where we want to go, where we need industry to be with us as part of that journey, recognizing that this won't happen overnight. So they have full line of sight to our short, medium, and long-term strategic plans and the ability to work with us as the technology changes to make sure. One of the largest criticisms that I have heard from industry is we go to them with, we know the solution. And because of that, we turn away a lot of potential innovation and opportunities. And so that's why we want to work with them before we finalize. But the bottom line is they will know where we want to go short, medium, and long term. We will consult with them and we will evolve that plan with them.
Thank you, Mr. Glover, and thank you, Mr. Drouin. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Glover, Mr. Davies, for being in attendance today. Ms. Harder requested why Gardner had seen information that we had not seen, and you referred that these were hypothetical dates for cabinet meetings and that Gardner would have come up with supposed dates. So if they are just suppositions, why would they be cabinet secrets? I do not understand. Thank you, Chair.
Happy to, again, consult with legal counsel, take a further review of this, and respond in writing. My answer is the one that I have. It is the one where my understanding is that speaking about cabinet and when it may or may not choose to meet is a potential confidence and is not to be disclosed. Gardner was not provided any specific cabinet confidential information. The fact that they reference it is not something that I should continue to promulgate or include in public disclosures. That is my understanding of the reasoning. I understand that that is not sitting well with a number of the committee members today. I'm happy to review that again with legal counsel to make sure that that answer is complete, but that is my answer today. And it is based on significant consultation and a very serious review of each and every one of those redactions, but I'm happy to revisit and update my answer if I've missed anything.
You talked about consulting regarding the redactions. Did you consult Gardner about what passages should be redacted?
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la question du membre. Oui, bien sûr, nous avons consulté avec Gardner.
Yes, of course, we consulted with Gardner.
Gardner, as this is their confidential business information, it is their proprietary information about their analysis of the industry and methodologies they use to rank and provide advice to not just us, but many international clients globally. So absolutely, we consulted with Gartner.
OK. Bon, pour la méthodologie,
Well, methodology is methodology. So if there are secrets in part, then we'll have to consult our academics and legal experts. Earlier, you said that certain departments have special requirements regarding the restructuring of their networks. My question is as follows. Would it be possible that those requirements be influenced by strong lobby groups? And over and above security, parties have been influenced. Is that possible?
Encore, merci, Mr.
Thank you very much, Chair, once again for the question from the member. In my opinion, yes.
Possible that there is lobbying that occurs. These are huge procurements. Look at the dollar values that I shared with you that we do. And for every winner of a procurement that we do, there are multiple losers. And so absolutely every single one of these firms employs lobbyists who are attempting at all levels. That's why the integrity of this process is incredibly important to me so that it is able to withstand the lobbying that we know occurs constantly.
dans votre allocution, vous faites
In your statement, you mentioned that SSC adopted a business approach. What does that mean? Is it the case for SSC or for also all other departments?
Monsieur le Président, malheureusement,
Mr. Chair, I'm not certain I've understood the question regarding our approach. Could I ask for clarification? Well, what do you mean by a business approach?
enterprise approach is one where we look at all of the departments as a whole, as the enterprise. And rather than, as you see, running each individual departmental network, we want to move them to simplified, standardized networks. So even when we have, for example, a lot of Juniper gear or Cisco gear or any of the others that you see in the ecosystem we have, it can be configured differently and is non-standardized. And so think about Interact terminals that we all work with every day. If each one of those was configured a little bit differently, required a slightly different way to operate for you. We want an enterprise approach so the user experience is the same, is consistent. That will allow us to aggregate requirements to obtain better price for Canadians, improve our service, and frankly, reduce cost over time while increasing reliability. And it's part of that Gartner remove the number of vendors, move to a smaller, more stable, predictable environment. That's what we mean by the enterprise approach.
et
How can the process be competitive when you have an enterprise approach? I mean, so it seems that when there is a decision to focus on one single company has already been made in advance. I mean, I guess there are whistleblowers, but how can you ensure that it's competitive?
Unfortunately, we're at the end of your time, and so, Mr. Glover, if you can maybe respond to that, if you feel comfortable in writing, please, to the committee, it'd be greatly appreciated. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, we heard in the testimony that the witness has suggested that there might be some alarm over what we're hearing in terms of the rationale around cabinet confidence. And I listened with interest to Ms. Harder's line of questioning and Ms. Vignola's line of questioning, and I certainly tend to agree. And so I need to better understand this idea of a hypothetical proactive cabinet confidence. I'll state as a form of a comment, not even a question, Mr. Chair. We've been at this committee Many of you know that I sit on public accounts, and I have been dogged about having this government actually be open by default, like they talk about. And it's often the case, Mr. Chair, that we get the cabinet confidence blockade from cabinet itself. But I'm not sure that I've ever heard of a staff or a bureaucrat coming to committee to say that they have taken it upon themselves to proactively disclose hypothetically in a future case scenario information which should be readily be made available to members of this cabinet. So through you, what precedent did the witness refer to when taking it upon themselves to use this hypothetical rationale of cabinet confidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I will undertake to follow up in writing, given the number of times this has come up, but in response today, it is the advice that I have received from legal counsel that speaking about when cabinet may or may not choose to meet is not something that is to be disclosed. So that is
Who's
not
legal counsel? Through you, Mr. Chair. Who's legal counsel?
Mr. Chair, Department of Justice provides advice.
And so they cited in their advice precedent of other scenarios where this would be the case?
Mr. Chair, again, the advice provided to me is privileged. I interpret that.
Can I ask through you, Mr. Chair? Can I ask through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Glover? Mr. Glover, I'll ask you two questions. One, and I don't know this isn't a personal thing. I'm just asking, how long have you been in your role in this department, and how many times in your role or in your levels of senior management within this department have you seen this proactive use of rationale for cabinet confidence?
Mr. Chair, the answer to that question is I have been at Shared Services for over 2 years. And in this role, because we do not do a lot, this would be the first time. But as a senior official, this would not be the first time that I have seen this and been told not to speak about when cabinet may or may not choose to meet and what it should choose to meet on.
In your cover letter, sir, in your cover letter,
as I understand it, confidential.
I'll accept it, and I'll look for whatever you have in writing. In your cover letter, Mr. Glover, you stated that you recognize the text of the motion and the privilege enjoyed by members of the House of Commons. And for this reason, should the chair feel that it remains important to access an unredacted version, we could be open to discussing the circumstances under which confidentiality of this sensitive information can be assured. So, given that, how could committee members gain access to unredacted versions of this report? And what are the risks associated with releasing this report unredacted to the public? And I guess my third question is, understanding that statement, why wouldn't you just have provided it to us under those circumstances to begin with?
Mr. Chair, the answer to the member's question is I could not presume how you chose to conduct the study, what you would need and the timeframes. So in order for me to provide this fully unredacted, I need consent from all of the parties. That takes time to consult, and your letter did not afford that time.
Does the consent of the party supersede our privileges as members? Because this is beginning to feel like a prima facie violation of our privilege.
Mr. Chair, the other factor here is even within that, there are some things like national security and others where I would not have been able to redact that. We do not disclose certain information that would frankly be a playbook for those people who would wish to attack our networks. And that would not be disclosed. And I am not in a position to do that. I respect this committee's right to ask those questions. And I hope this committee understands my rights and responsibilities to protect certain information.
I'll just share by way of a closing comment. This isn't through to you, Mr. Glover. I just want to share my alarm in this new found proactive hypothetical rationale for cabinet competence that hasn't gone to cabinet as a way for what I consider to be an increasing violation of transparency and open government from a government that claims to be open by default. And I hope that we can find ways as a committee, and as a nonpartisan way, to find ways in which staff can be instructed, as I'm to understand, to members of this committee through the mandate letters of the ministers, that they are to be open by default. And I just don't find that to be the case. And I'm startled by the precedent that this is going to now set for other, senior levels of management that come before us and say, hypothetically, this could be cabinet confidence, therefore we're not going to share it proactively. So those are my concerns, and I'll look forward to the next round of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. And now we'll go to the second round of questioning, and we will go to 5 minutes with Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Glover, did you talk to the law clerk of the House for legal advice or just to Justice?
Mr. Chair, I spoke to my legal counsel, which would be a member from the Department of Justice.
So not the law clerk of the House. I want to go over your cover letter, and Mr. Green alluded to it. You commented you'd be open to discussing the circumstances. Do you not find it offensive that here Parliament of Canada passed a motion requesting information and you're only open to following a direction from Parliament? Do you understand how we view this?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. I understand how you view it, and I would hope that the members also understand, as a member of the executive branch, my responsibilities to protect national security and confidential business information.
I'm glad you're open to discussing following the rules of Parliament. Let me ask you, you mentioned national security often as a reason for redaction. Page 104, you redacted contact information for employees and Gartner offices. Is that a matter of national security? Can perhaps the Soviet Union or the Russians or the Communist Party of China not maybe find your offices through Google? And this gets to the whole point of the items that you've redacted. You're making excuses or what I think false reasoning, but at the same time, you've redacted contact information for national security reasons.
I have redacted that information for national security reasons, yes, and it is not something that someone would just find through Google. Unfortunately,
they wouldn't be able to find Gartner contact information through Google. Okay, let me. Did the contract with Gartner specify information regarding proprietary information?
Mr. Chair,
that they would not share with us?
Mr. Chair, it did. The contract complies with standard contracting principles, and obviously continues to operate under my obligations.
So you view it as your obligation. Okay. Who has access to the unredacted report? How many people in your department, and at what levels?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
How many people in shared services have full access to the unredacted report, and at what levels are they?
I would not be able to estimate off the top of my head.
Give me a ballpark.
Give me a ballpark.
What's a handful? 10, 25?
Again, I know that I speak about this with about 5 to 6 members of my immediate team.
Okay.
But I would have to consult with them in terms of the number, but all would be...
What level are they?
Mr. McCauley, excuse me, Mr. Glover and Mr. McCauley, I apologize for interrupting. The bells are ringing at this point in time, and procedurally, we need to have unanimous consent to proceed. I would therefore ask if, because the bells are ringing for 30 minutes, Mr. McCauley has 1 minute and 45 seconds left. I would suggest that, and then we have Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes, that we continue until Mr. McKinnon finishes his, and then we suspend for the vote. Do we have unanimous consent for that? I'm seeing thumbs up. Yes, thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting. I apologize. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor.
Mr. Glover, if it's only a handful of your team, what level are those employees, please? Are they Deputy Minister level, ADM level? What levels, please?
Those would be at the Assistant Deputy Minister level,
Yeah.
and with one exception at the Director General level.
Okay. So you consider it proper that an ADM would have access to this information, but members of Parliament requesting this information should not receive it?
The members of my staff who have seen this report are subject to protect the information around national security and confidential business information to the same standard that I am. So
How
I
many,
am
how many
confident
people
that they
know
are
of the data
withholding-
center locations? Because you've redacted out the data center locations for security reasons. How many people know where those locations are? I imagine it's quite a few.
I would imagine it's quite a few as well. Yes. The people that work in them, the people that support them, all have been appropriately security cleared and bonded for confidentiality. But yes, given the size and the nature of them,
members of
there are a
Parliament,
few.
members of Parliament cannot be trusted with that, but I assume someone who's done drywall at the place, who knows where the location is, trusted with that information. Wonderful. One of the items you
Not
redacted
correct,
out,
Mr. Chair.
one of the items you redacted on page 78, comments about the location is an empty building, and yet you've redacted it out. What is so special or about an empty building that you would redact that out from parliamentarians to read?
Mr. Chair, just to be clear on the drywall comment, the people, the trades in there would not know the purpose of that building. They would be under strict
Are
orders
you
in and out.
serious?
Yes,
You're telling
Mr.
me
Chair,
that electricians and other
absolutely
people building a data center wouldn't know that
Thank
it's
you.
a data center?
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
I find that
And
hard
thank
to
you, Ms.
believe.
Glover. We'll now go to Mr. McKinnon for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today and thank them for their service to Canada. I do want to take a moment to just do a brief history lesson. Shared Service Canada was a creation of course, the Harper government, and one that famously was one where they booked savings to create a phony deficit and under-resourced the organization such that it didn't have the people, the equipment, the dollars required to carry out the job it was given, which was fundamentally to provide the IT infrastructure and backbone for the government of Canada. I find it intriguing now that we, some 5 years later or so, are questioning the president of Shared Services Canada on the very attempts to correct that state of affairs, or at least one very important element of his attempts to correct that state of affairs, and insisting that he divulge confidential information in a public setting in order to do so. Would Mr. McCauley or Ms. Harder or Madame Vignola insist that we divulge the codes for a fighter jet mission? Would they insist that we divulge passwords for critical infrastructure?
Point of order, Chair. Point of order.
I don't think that they would do that. And it is shocking to me that in an era where cybersecurity is among our largest threats, that
Ms.
these
Harder?
members continue to insist that
Thank
we
you.
divulge.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you giving me the floor, and I appreciate my honorable colleague respecting you in your position as chair, as he so urges others in this committee to do on a frequent basis. Chair, it would appear that the member who is speaking right now is actually misleading the committee and those who might be watching. So the member who is speaking right now said that my colleagues and
I apologize, Mr. Chair, but that's not a point of order.
That is not a point of order.
No, it is absolutely a
That's
point
for the
of order.
chair to decide, not for you, Francis.
Order. Ms. Harder, Mr. McCauley, Ms. McKinnon, I have stopped your time at this point in time, so.
Thank you.
Ms. Harder?
Thank you. Thank you. So the member is saying that we would like to see that confidential information be made known to the committee. That actually hasn't been our request, so we would welcome that as well. However, what our request has been is that the witness be able to tell us why it was redacted. So I would very much appreciate, through you, Chair, if the member could stick to the facts and not mislead other individuals who are watching.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Mr. McKinnon, please, if you would continue with your questioning.
Yes, thank you. The witness is sworn to and has taken an oath to uphold national security secrets, cabinet confidences, and other critical information. And he is owed the benefit of the doubt of this committee and of the Parliament of Canada that he is following that oath to its total conclusion. Now, what I want to ask Mr. Glover in thanking him for his service and for especially the work on building out the very network that we're discussing today so that it may serve public servants everywhere in Canada in the pandemic environment, and thank him for that. I want to ask him to describe a little bit about the network environment he observed and inherited when he took this job, one that was, I know, in the midst of being repaired and redressed. But I wanted to ask him to spell out what he discovered and his basic philosophy in maintaining and building that network infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. And this will hopefully answer other members' questions about why certain pieces of information have been withheld. On any given day, when I arrived at Shared Services two years ago, there were over 400 unplanned outages per day. This past year, we had almost 80-some thousand unplanned outages. That's about 200 a day. That's the state of the infrastructure. So we've made significant improvements. Of those unplanned outages, the number that are critical is pretty small, but significant. And it's about 300, just a little bit less than 300. Critical outages. That's where services to Canadians or public servants that need them desperately to do their jobs are out for an extended period of time. So we're racing to fix some of these old, outdated systems faster than they are breaking to make sure that public servants have the tools they need to serve Canadians. The security issues why we wouldn't disclose the location of a data center. On any given day, as Mr. Scott Jones testified to this very committee, there are 2 billion malicious activities that we intercept each and every day. These are not theoretical cyber threats. They are real, they are organized, and they would desperately love to know the details of our architecture and the location of that architecture. So absolutely, I will take my responsibility to protect that information because they are assets of the nation that this government uses to serve Canadians.
I assume that any decision, any procurement
Thank
decision.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnon. Unfortunately, in respecting of the time and with the vote, we will, just so that everyone is aware that we are going to suspend the meeting now till after the vote, and then we will reconvene after the vote with the questions. And so with that said, the meeting is suspended until after the vote.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being in attendance. My question is for Mr. Glover. I hope I've pronounced your name properly. One of your role is to transmit information to the minister. Now, with regard to the modernization of the system and the proposals made, is all of the information conveyed to the minister, or is some not?
Mr. Glover, you're still on mute.
My apologies,
you.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question and for the good pronunciation of my name.
Absolutely. I have a responsibility to keep the minister informed and aware of the activities of shared services, but that also includes a certain separation, for example, on things like procurement decisions and others, where that is the department's responsibility and not the minister. So it is difficult to overgeneralize, but there is definitely a regular flow of information and it is dependent upon the authorities and delegations with respect to the timing and the level of detail.
Thank you for the answer. Does Shared Services Canada, is it Shared Services Canada that tells different bodies and entities what suppliers to use? Or are they free to use the enterprise of their choice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the members' questions. We set up the supply arrangements. So departments come to us with their requirements, and then we go to market to fill them. So we do that either through competitive processes, and if you look at the material, that's about 87% of the time, a little over 1.13 billion. And sometimes we do that through non-competitive because of the urgent nature of the requirement. That's about 13% of the time, represents about $170 million. But they come to us and we're responsible for the procurement.
Thank you. Do they need to confirm with Shared Services Canada before making a choice or before a final decision or before contracts are signed?
Chair, for the member's question. And again, it's pretty much, frankly, final. If we go out through a competitive process, the requirements are the requirements. The submissions from industry are assessed against those requirements as per procurement policy. And when a winner is selected, they have a right to supply. And the departments do not get to veto that. They do not get to choose. We go through a fair, open, transparent process and use the procurement policy.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. Appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
How's the decisions made to buy Cisco?
Mr. Chair, that's an exceptionally broad question. I don't want to frustrate the minister with my answer. So if there's more precision.
I appreciate the promotion. Not quite there as the opposition guy, but I wonder, I just received an interesting email about the possibility of staff being directed to buy. Are you directed to buy, to purchase Cisco?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's much clearer. Departments will come to us with what they perceive as, well, not what they perceive, with their requirements. And there are times where they will say, we can't accept interoperability. We don't have the time to test anything. They want what we call like for like. And they make the case that we have to get, not necessarily Cisco, it could be any vendor's gear, and we must replace it with exactly the same vendor. And that's the instance where Gartner said, when you are doing that, you should review those to make sure they are what the department's claim. So we used to just, not used to all the time, but mostly just accept those. We now review and challenge those requirements to make sure that there is an operational imperative and that we cannot move to a more open, transparent process. So they make the request and they lay out the case and the reasoning why.
I'm going to take just a shot in the dark. I'm drawing on a recollection that's pretty old, and I just want to make sure it's not the case. But does Cisco employ or do your data centers employ any Huawei technology?
And Mr. Chair, our data centers do not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We will now go to Ms. Harder for 5 minutes.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to go back to the conversation before. It was stated, repeatedly that information on page 78 was redacted because of cabinet confidence. But part of what we have there is, we have, quote, blank is currently an empty data hall awaiting new operations and would have unused capacity for 12 to 24 months, end quote. Another one, we know at a blank center, DCSL costs incurred for power support and maintenance are $4.5 million per year. Another quote, data center blank blank, incremental costs of power cooling 2 times over blank, end quote. So we're talking about bills. We're talking about the location of these centers. We're talking about the impact that they have. We're talking about estimated costs. Sorry, why is this cabinet confidential information?
So I want to double check my list, Mr. Chair, but that to me, based on what the member's question, would be national security. The location of the data centers those are assets, the workloads in them, what moves through them, including, unfortunately, I know it sounds strange, but an empty data center. We would not want to telegraph when we intend to fill that and where it will be to make it a target for those who might want to intercept traffic going in or out of that. So we have every intention of filling
Chair,
that data
what I find
center.
interesting is that there was a press release actually issued in 2018 after opening a data center. And within the press release, it gives the location of the data center. In addition to that, I actually can just go online right now and Google it. So why is it that this information is being put in a press release and I can Google it right now and find where these data centers are, but the witness thought it was necessary to revoke that information from the Gardner report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question.
Is that a breach in national security then, that information is out there on Google? Is that what the witness is suggesting?
What the witness is trying to convey is that depending upon the data center, the nature of the workloads in it, absolutely, we would consider that of national significance and security and would not proactively disclose that. Absolutely. Okay. And I would not perpetuate that if somebody else has.
So then I guess I'm just wondering then the department, when they sent out the press release, because it came from the department that the witness oversees, when they sent out that press release, were they breaching national security? Because that would seem to be what the witness is saying then. You can't have it both ways.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I'm sure the member is aware. We run literally hundreds of data centers, and so it would depend the nature of the workload. Not everything we do is secret, protected B. There are some things for which there isn't that sensitivity, absolutely, and it would be disclosable. It depends on the nature of the workload that goes through that and its security assessment. Those security assessments are also subject to change as the workload changes in them and the security posture and the intelligence of those actors looking to frankly intercept the data.
The center is the Borden Center, which is one of the four. So I guess your department breached national security then when the press release went out?
Mr. Chair, I'm not going to comment further.
So we've gone from it being cabinet confidence, and then it's a matter of national security, and then now no further comment because a press release went out from this witness's department, which now makes him guilty and his department guilty of either putting out something that was in breach to national security, or he's misfeeding information to this committee trying to mislead us. Which one is it? Through you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure. I heard a statement, not a question.
No, there was clearly a question. Did the department breach national security, or is the witness trying to mislead the committee right now by giving us information that is false? Can't be one or it has to be one or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the clarity from the member. I can assure you I am in no way attempting to mislead the committee in any of my answers. Absolutely not.
Okay, perfect. So if the witness is not looking to mislead this committee, then national security was breached when the press release went out, which gave the location of the data center in Borden. That's unfortunate. And the member testifying to this committee then should perhaps have a review done of his employment.
Again, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure there was a question for me in that last.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Glover. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank our two witnesses for joining our committee meeting today and for their ongoing service to our country. Maybe my first question to the witnesses is the opposition voted down amendments to view these documents in camera or have these in limited distribution. What would have been the risks and consequences if redacted information would have been disclosed to the public?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. The security assessment, which is constantly changing, which is relevant to the previous member's question, is material here. The number of threats as we move to more services, digital and online, are increasing. As I testified earlier, and this is not my data, this is Scott Jones from the Canadians, the CSE, 2 billion malicious events every single day that we intercept and block. And those are only increasing, and they're only getting more sophisticated. So the risk here is that sensitive government operations could have been compromised. Services to Canadians could have been interrupted, stopped, brought down, or as we have seen, most frequently, there's an attempt to obtain information about Canadians for financial gain elsewhere in the system. So that is one part of this. The other part of this is our relationship with the vendors who take very seriously the technology that they deploy and provide to the Government of Canada to defend against some of these security threats. And if they felt that their proprietary information was being disclosed or compromised, may choose not to or alter the arrangement within which we would do that, which could have a material impact on the availability and the cost of those services to the Canadian taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Glover, and I think we can all agree that we don't want that to be the outcome of such a measure. Maybe for my next question, aside from the Gartner report, your department's also provided other documents to this committee last March 31st. Could you speak to what those documents are and how they can be useful for this particular study that we're working on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. My attempt, again, as I stated in my opening, was to try and be as transparent, recognizing the important nature of the study you are undertaking. We wanted to be very clear and transparent with you about where we are going with respect to the nature of the network. There's a lot of talk about interoperability, the enterprise approach, and so we shared with you the Network Modernization Way Forward document. I think people often think of the network as one simple thing, and we've tried to include diagrams for you, for industry, and every interested party, just how complex the network is, the different topologies. There was a sense that it was just a Cisco environment. We've tried to include all of the different vendors that we have in that environment and to lay out where we're going. We also included our network and security strategy, again, to demonstrate how we have been transparent with industry about what we are doing and how we intend to go from a strategic document in the way forward to something that is more technical in nature, and to share with you the types and nature of conversations that we are having. I also felt that it would be helpful, and so we put together an information for parliamentarians about the nature of our work and what we've done, given the number of questions that have been asked of me. So, the sense that we don't compete a lot of our procurements. And so we tried proactively to share with you the volume we do, how much of it is done competitively, how much of it is sole source, just not just in sheer numbers, but what that represents in terms of dollar values. And tried to include, because of previous interest and we feel a social responsibility, how much of those things go to small and medium-sized enterprises. And we were able, with data, to target Indigenous specific businesses. We hope to be able to expand that moving forward to more employment equity groups, women-led businesses, and other employment equity-led businesses moving forward. So that, given the number of procurements that we do, while we are trying to advance that enterprise approach, we are also trying to encourage Canadian businesses of all sizes to interact with us.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. And I think that clarification will be very helpful for this committee, given the questions that have come up today and some of the studies that we've been working on as well. And I think that, Mr. Chair, do I have any more time?
Thank you, Mr. Weiler. The buzzer just went, so appreciate that. We will now go to our third round and our third and final round in light of the time constraints we had today. So we'll start with Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To the witness, I realize this is difficult sitting here going through this, like you've mentioned national security a lot, and then my colleague Ms. Harder was talking about your press release. I'm looking at a request for information issued by your department that actually lists the three addresses in Barrie, Gatineau, Borden, the exact address, and then for Montreal with to be advised. If it's so secret that you have to withhold it from parliamentarians, why would it be on the buy and sell website from your department?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question.
And this is from January 22nd of this year.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, January 22nd of this year, just want to confirm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Chair, rather than speculate, I would appreciate the opportunity to investigate the specifics.
Oh, January 22nd, sorry, 2020, but still during your tenure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I would very much appreciate the opportunity to investigate this properly and report back in writing. And the details will help accelerate
But you understand what I'm getting at is you've redacted stuff, or you've had justice, your legal advice, redact stuff from Parliament, but at the same time, you're publishing it on the website for everyone in the world to see, but you're trying to withhold this information from Parliament, pretending, and I'm using that word pretending because obviously it's not confidential, but pretending that it's secret information. So it leads me to believe that everything you've redacted here is for pretend reasons as well, and not as you've displayed to us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I would just like to reassure the committee that my intention is not to withhold any information to this committee at all. It is to uphold my responsibilities with respect to my legal obligations that I have to protect confidential business information and others. I definitely understand.
No, I understand, and I understand it's not your intent, but it does appear otherwise. Let me ask you, on page 78, you quote cabinet confidence, blocking out the part of incremental cost of power and cooling. How is that cabinet confidence? This is not a Treasury Board submission with cost, and I would understand that as cabinet confidence, but this is not a Treasury Board submission. This is not even an RFI. It's just a ballpark cost from a consultant. So I'm trying to wrap my head around, again, how's this cabinet confidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. And there is a sense that this is precedent setting. I just would point all committee members to the Access to Information Act, where it makes very clear that any member before or proposed to be before cabinet is a confidence. And that was the interpretation that was used. So my team, under my direction, was asked to consistently interpret and apply the Access to Information law.
Do you realize that if you use that, you could block everything? You could assume everything is before cabinet. Every single discussion from every MP, every vendor, eventually has to go through the Treasury Board process and a Treasury Board submission, and therefore is cabinet confidence. Every RFI, every RFP, every quote would therefore, by this interpretation, be cabinet confidence. This conversation could be considered that, because you could then go to Minister Murray and discuss this meeting and therefore refuse to ever say anything again. I find it a very shocking precedence that either your legal counsel or your department is trying to present to us as cabinet confidence. It's not even anywhere close to the beginning of a Treasury Board submission. So as a parliamentarian, I'm dumbfounded at what Shared Services is presenting to us, withholding from us, or again, I'll use the word pretending in their justification to withhold this information from Parliament. I think I'm pretty much out of time, but I would really hope that you go back to your legal folks and have a good talk and come back to this committee with the full report to us, unredacted.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley, and thank you, Mr. Glover. And if you feel that if you can respond to that in writing, if you would send that to the clerk, it would be appreciated. Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Kuzmierczuk for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Glover, for your excellent responses thus far. I wanted to talk a little bit about the information for parliamentarians, the network modernization and procurement document, which I found very helpful. And I wanted to ask you just a general question. I want to move away from the line of questioning about cabinet confidentiality and national security. In terms of network modernization, how has COVID changed or informed our thinking about network modernization and maybe procurement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. The short answer is, in many ways, and this is not anything I would want attributed to me, but there are those who have said that COVID and the pandemic has accelerated the shift to digital right across all aspects of society, and we have certainly seen that within the departments that we serve and their level of ambition to provide services digitally to Canadians. So increasingly, we are seeing the rollout of new technologies and new services to Canadians done at record-setting paces. Call centers used to be these big physical buildings. We had to scramble in days, literally days, to figure out how to allow people to operate call centers from their home and kit them up to be able to do that. The network is increasingly important moving forward, and I think that will be something that will be increasingly important for this country. Frankly, those who have access to the network, a strong signal, will be able to access those incredible services. And those in remote, isolated communities, we're going to have to find a way to roll those out. The network is increasingly important. It connects us all, and it is a way increasingly that government and businesses are delivering services. The collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams and others that we use accelerated that rollout. That's created new opportunities and new challenges. And cybersecurity, as I've said earlier, the threat landscape is changing and changing fast. And it is getting more sophisticated because they understand there is more volume here and therefore more opportunity. So from a procurement point of view, that means as we move forward, simplifying, standardizing, while not relying on just one vendor, and making sure that cybersecurity is top of mind in everything we do will be incredibly important. And that's why we talk about, and Gartner in its report talked about those 3 pillars and monitoring. So we know what is happening so that we can detect and respond far more proactively than we can now. And that will require some standardization.
And I imagine, connecting literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of staff at home as opposed to in government office buildings is going to be something that is prioritized, or a premium is placed on that. I imagine that working remotely has sort of maybe changed our thinking a little bit even more. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, the member's assumption is correct. We had a couple, like maybe on a busy day, 30, 40,000 public servants working from home before the pandemic. In a snowstorm, ice storm, and it gone up a little bit, but not much. We're over, well, about 300,000. And we don't call them people, we call them connections, because people will connect and disconnect. So we don't actually have connections for every single person, because not every single person is on at the same time. So it's how we consolidate efficiencies. But the numbers are staggeringly large in terms of public servants working from home and the network requirements to support that. And the bandwidth requirements, because we push more video now. Used to walk into a meeting room, and so the reliance on the network and the bandwidth required is significantly higher.
Mr. Glover, I really appreciate how forthright you've been throughout this entire process. I appreciate how you've communicated clearly with the committee. I appreciate how flexible you've been as well too, and how you've always offered up to provide information to this committee or come back with additional information. So I just wanted to put that on the record and really do appreciate that highest level of professionalism that you've demonstrated at this committee, and always being open to do more. And that's something that I very much appreciate. And so I wanted to put that on the record. I do have a couple questions, but I'll save those for additional rounds because I do believe that I am out of time. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, you hear the buzzer go just now, so good timing. Thank you, Mr. Kazmierczuk. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola, or sorry, to Ms. Desbin. And I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong, but you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Glover, I second the colleague who's preceded me. We do very much appreciate you attending and giving us all this time. And I understand you're dealing with very significant security challenges. So these security clearances, you said you don't always know how many people around you have the authorization to read reports. Could you give us a list of people who would have had access to the report that has not been redacted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I'm not in a position today.
I'm not in a position today to provide an exact figure, but the principle.
Make sure that only those who need this information have it. So only those who need it to conduct their day-to-day responsibilities would be privy to this information. So that goes back to that question about the drywaller and others. They would be appropriately security cleared, vetted, and indoctrinated in order to be able to interact with this information or with the data center. So anybody involved in this is because it is a job function.
Thank you for that answer. Would it be possible then to provide us with a list, even if it's not exhaustive, to let us know who had access and who did not? For example, with Gartner, to see any sensitive information, were they required to get a security clearance?
Member's question. I will be happy to undertake to provide a full response in terms of both Gartner and within SSC. So I have a principle today. My understanding of the question is looking for something more precise, and so I will undertake to provide that.
And we, as MPs, could we obtain a security clearance of the same level as Gartner? We are elected, and we are in a comms committee. Would it be possible? Might that be the solution, that we get clearance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I would have to consult with counsel. One of the things that I was advised on is that if I was to disclose this report, or even in camera, it would be a disclosure and I would be in breach. So there are some challenges there that I would have to consult further with counsel on.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. We'll now go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes.
My friend and our guest from the block raises a line of questioning that I had also wished to pursue. Through Mr. Chair to Mr. Glover, you had mentioned that it's not often the case that you have this type of process in place in terms of requiring this type of security. I'm wondering, how is it then, given the sensitive nature of this, you wouldn't have a more precise account of who would have had access to this? That seems like a material piece of information for somebody in your position. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I apologize as somebody said this is not something that happens normal. We are dealing with sensitive information, sensitive systems all the time. Pretty much every department works with
Sorry, to be clear, cabinet confidentiality used in a proactive way that would preclude members of parliament not having access that members of his department would have access to. how, knowing that it's that sensitive, would Mr. Glover not have a precise account for who would have had access to this information? I find that very challenging.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I want to be very clear that I have a sense, but you have asked for precise numbers. I have these conversations with members of my direct management team who have certain obligations and indoctrination that I am very clear of. And I trust that they have conversations relative to the functioning of their responsibility consistent with those delegations and their obligations. But that prevents me from speculating and giving you the complete number you have. I can speak to about my number of direct reports, but I would have to canvass them about what they have done within their chain of command. But I have every confidence. I have every confidence that they would uphold their responsibilities.
Would Cisco have gotten this report in its entirety unredacted?
No. Mr. Chair, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what level of security clearance would Gardner have to have received to receive the information that they would have needed in order to make this report?
I will have to, Mr. Chair, I'll have to confirm what exactly the security requirements were, and I will happily provide that in writing. I can speculate now, but I want to provide a very precise answer to the member's question.
I'll share with you that
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. Green. Sorry. Thank you, and thank you for Mr. Glover for offering to provide that in writing. We appreciate you sending that to the clerk. I will now go to Ms. Harder for 5 minutes.
My apologies, Chair. I'm so sorry. I actually would like to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. McCauley. I think he had a good line of questions that he was going on. However, I am happy to continue if he wishes.
I think Mr. Paul Hoos is going to start off.
Okay. Mr. Paul Hoos.
J'avais fermé mon cartable, Monsieur le Président, parce que
Sorry, I had thought we'd ended, so I had closed my folder. If you give me a few seconds.
Ouais, merci, désolé.
Thank you very much, and apologies to you all. First question, and thank you for being here. How come you've put all of the contracts in the hands of Cisco and therefore avoided all kinds of diversification?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. And I would refer to the material that I provided. We do not put all of the contracts in Cisco's hands. In fact, even when we procure Cisco equipment, it is not through direct relationships with Cisco. It is done through either a competitive process or through a mini competitive process with people who have pre-qualified to provide that type of equipment. So it always goes through what we would describe as a reseller.
Okay. Mais le National Post rapporte que
The National Post reported that there was $210 million awarded to Cisco. Of that portion, what was awarded without any tender?
Chair, in the documents that I provided on pages 11 through 15, you will see all of the different vendors, what we inherited, and over time, how that has evolved. So it depends on the nature of the network and which piece of it we are talking to see which portion of Cisco has provided more or less over time as we've moved forward. So that is all in the documents in full detail that was provided to the committee.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to give the rest of my time to Mr. McCauley.
Quick questions just on the redaction again, Mr. Glover. Did you have any role in it, or was it purely the legal advice you received? Like, did they hand the report back to you saying, take this out, or did you provide them direction on what to look at?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. I think it is a very important one. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. This is done at my direction as a deputy head, and it is my responsibility and accountability. I turn to an access to information unit that is well trained in the administration of this, and they are directed on standing order, not specific to this request, but to all requests, to enforce the law strictly.
Yeah,
And when they are not clear about how to interpret it, to obtain legal advice.
Yeah, like specifically, I'm asking like things like you crossed, well, not you, but redacted out SWOT plans, like the weaknesses, strengths, and those kind of items. Like who looked at that and said, well, this is business confidence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That would have been professionals trained and well experienced in interpretation of the act.
From your department, though, or from the Justice?
From my department, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I just want to ask you a question just about switching track about Cisco, about the amount of sole sourcing. Like you mentioned, the 1.3 billion of procurement, 87% is competitively bid. But you went on, continue though, you talked about name branding. Like if your department specifies it has to be a Cisco brand, but then goes to competitive bids on who's delivering the Cisco branded product, is that not a form of sole sourcing? Is that included in that 13%? Or when you're not forcing, but you're basically directing to use a Cisco product, but going to vendors to deliver it, do you consider that competitive bid?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. So if it is, the interpretation is to the vendors, to the marketplace. So if we target a specific vendor to provide the equipment, that is the non-competitive sole source. The requirements may dictate Cisco, and then we could compete the Cisco requirements. So we would consider that to be competitive.
So just walk me through. It says contracts were issued to 25 different resellers of Cisco, 22 of which were medium enterprises. So these are contracts where you've told people you have to use Cisco, and then you go to 2 or 3 installers, for lack of better words, to install. Do you consider that a sole source of Cisco when you're basically directing people they have to do a Cisco product?
So there are, Mr. Chair, there are 2 parts to that answer. From a procurement point of view, that is a competitive procurement because the industry has been...
in your 13%, is it included in that 13% sole source, or in the 87% you consider competitively bid?
Mr. Chair, as I said, that would be in the 87% that was competitively bid. There were a number of firms competing for that business to ensure we obtained the best price for Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Glover.
Thanks.
And if you feel that there's more you can add to that, then please do so. Appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. Johari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, thank you, Mr. Glover and Mr. Davis, for your professionalism, the great work you're doing, and for keeping our networks actually going, government networks actually going during the time that we are facing many difficulties. I'd like to go to the information for parliamentarian report dated February 24, 2021, the network modernization and procurement. In there, you talked about that you published the network modernization way forward document, and I believe in your opening remarks you talked about the short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy that you have or the department has for the network modernization. Can you, about a minute, can you spend time kind of demystifying or breaking down what is the short-term, medium-term, and long-term vision that the department has?
Mr. Chair, for the first time, I'm going to turn to Mr. Davies, the Chief Technology Officer. He's far more capable to do that quickly than I. Matt, you're on mute.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you, Mr. Chair. actually, one of the recommendations from Gardner Group was for us to be more specific with respect to timing. They broke their report down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term objectives. One of the clear recommendations that came through that report was for us to spend time assessing the current state and then putting together a plan with clear activities for the short-term, medium-term, and longer-term. They also overlaid in that report the guidance for us in terms of what they see from their technology roadmap when certain technologies are going to become more relevant. So we took the advice from Gardner Group. We took some of it immediately and incorporated it into our updated Network Modernization Way Forward paper. We're going to meet with industry later this on May 14th to give the feedback to it. It's also important that this document helped us to have a good discussion with industry partners, and got feedback from 26 different partners on that modernization way forward that we then took in and incorporated, and will incorporate into our plans moving forward. Overall, I think I've probably talked a little bit longer, but this is the first time
No
for me,
worries.
so
But
thank you.
is there any way that you could give us one of the characteristics, at least one characteristics of what's the short term, what's the medium term, what's the long term? Mr. Glover?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the member's question. As a senior leader, I would describe it as stabilize it. It breaks too often. So we need to assess it and fix its vulnerabilities and weaknesses. It is too complex. I want to standardize and simplify it moving forward so that it is easier for us to maintain and far more predictable. When I was speaking earlier about outages, fully 30% of the outages are a result of changes that are made. So that interoperability everybody talks about is not always guaranteed, doesn't always work. And we need to simplify, we need to standardize as we move forward. The future is software-defined zero trust. And that is really where we need to get to more quickly. But we first have to stabilize the patient, stop the bleeding, move to standardization, consistency, and then the longer term. And obviously, any opportunities we see to advance the longer term while we're doing the short and medium term, we will attempt to harvest early. But that would be the way I would chunk it out.
That was great. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. In your report under SSC procurement by numbers, although you mentioned it in response to my colleague MP Weiler, can you do a deep dive for us as it relates to the competitive procurement, small and medium businesses as well as indigenous business? Give us some sense of numbers and give us some sense of dollars that we could we could share with those who may not have read the report.
Absolutely. So as I said, Mr. Chair, earlier, and I would encourage members to take the time to read those documents. I do hope you find them useful. We're about $1.3, $1.4 billion in procurements in 1920. Of that, 87% we would call competitive. And recognizing your earlier member's question, even when that is for requirements a vendor, we force competition as per questions from members here to ensure the best possible price. So that is part of what we do. And then when there's urgent requirements, we have no choice. We got to go out. A particular system needs more memory. It can't keep up with the demands of COVID, the number of Canadians logging in. We need to do it quickly, surgically. We'll go out and do some non-competitive. So it's about 87-13 in terms of competitive, non-competitive as it moves forward. And then we're quite pleased with the number of small and medium-sized enterprises that are engaged in that. And that we think is something that we would like to continue to do. We don't want to be just dealing with the large multinationals as it moves forward. So we're quite happy with the number of small and medium enterprises that we are doing, but we would like to grow that number moving forward. And we would like to share with you better information about what we are doing moving forward on unemployment equity, what we can be better doing for Aboriginal businesses, Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, other employment equity, disabled. And so we are improving our reporting requirements on that front. But I am pleased to say in 2019, we awarded 117 contracts to Indigenous businesses for almost $36 million. Good, but a long, long way to go to improve that number.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glover, and thank you, Mr. Johari, for your questions. And that brings us to the end of our questioning today. And I'd like to thank Mr. Glover and Mr. Davies for coming to committee and answering questions from the committee. And so with that said, thank you. You're free to go. This does end our public portion of the meeting. We were going to go in camera, but in light of the time, I suspect, and just looking around the room, I think that what we were going to discuss in camera, we can do at a later date. I will indicate to the committee members that you have received just today an update on the calendar and the calendar scheduling. So please take a look at that. Also, just so that you're aware, we have been trying to get the ministers to attend for the mains and to talk about the mains. At this point in time, and again, you would have heard today that the Minister for Digital Government has provided us with a time. We're still waiting and have not heard from the Minister from PSPC. And with that said, I wish you all good night and thank you very much. I declare the meeting adjourned.